The foundation of our house was built on an anthem. The anthem was a prayer our hearts rendered in the language of silence. The rooms reflect our hearts, with no light, no warmth. The floors balance the stones our souls carry, flowers withered by bitter breath. Cold crawls over us and nibbles at our seams. We never knew lack until poverty found residency in our mouths. Despondency has been rattling the door's hinges. Notwithstanding that, tonight we're hosting a dinner to find out how we got here, how we have come to this house come ICU to further life or to end it. Who bribed us into deserting our lifeline? We asked all and sundry to come dine with us. A night that stretched for 26 years. We served organic suggestions that night, topped with rhetorical questions. These guests are not here to eat the plight of our life's stories, to hear how we are not living to go to heaven, but to not look at every meal as though it's the Last Supper. We all keep glancing at equality with faint smiles, trying to ignore how we became victimized by the spoils of a struggle. No one often reminds the once oppressed how tyrannical giants fall. So when fortune favors them, greed has them inflating, bursting beyond their bellies. Illusions of democracy attempt to open my mouth, but reality has this tongue feeling like a severed limb. There are gaps in this conversation of intellectual liberation that have our voices shifting as tectonic plates. Until Father Time uttered his only words that evening, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Abruptly, labor shouted to capitalism. This forged long-run romance between us and progress is no longer glue that keeps this house together. You have redefined moral hazards, dealt a hand to hedge everything but the people. With a smug, capitalism retorted, "Don't feed on what you can't fund." The futurist put on his contact lens to comment. This house is on fire. All present are flooding it with emptiness, drenching every space with blood clots to save its foundation. Tip the scales. Sorrow has assaulted your lungs for far too long. Deflate into a readiness to flow. Teach the mind so the heart may preserve its lessons. Our minds are gifts. Earth acknowledges our presence. And so the next day, we spring cleaned, dusted off distrust, washed the years of betrayal off the walls, washed inequality off our skin, watched injustice flow out the baths, and see it drain stagnation's throat. To hear our own esophagus emphasize the echo of victories our stomachs are yet to clasp. Soak ourselves in knowledge from Urban Festival 2020, embracing our best ideals which await in plenty. We will refurnish every room with a lived experience, embedded in the sight of memory, not yet sung of us.
Good afternoon, everyone. Stephanie, Karen, may I start?
Yes, you can, Ariel. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our event today titled Yima. Yima is a Xhosa homonym which means to halt a process or action, and it also means to stand firm. This project is presented as a collective contribution to the 40-day Safer Cities Challenge by UN Habitat. We are delighted to share this event on the Urban Fest platform. My name is Ariel Huang, and I will be facilitating our conversation this afternoon. Today's partners include the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Sibikwa Arts Centre, and the South African Cities Network. We will start off with a presentation from Karen Green of Sibikwa Arts Centre. Thereafter, panelists will be introduced. We will then watch a short video together, followed by a discussion. You are most welcome to pose your questions to our panelists in the chat box, and I'd like to ask you all please to keep your microphones on mute and cameras off. Thank you for joining us today as we elicit actionable solutions to address issues of safety in South African cities. Karen, over to you.
Thank you, Ariel. So this presentation will give a little bit of information about the UN Habitat's 40 Days Safer Cities Challenge and how the YIMA project aligns to the overall objective of the challenge. I'm just struggling to click to my next slide. Oh, there we go. It's a 40 days challenge to innovate for safer cities. This project is presented, as Ariel said, as a collective contribution by the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Sibikwa Arts Centre, and the South African Cities Network as part of the UN Habitat's 40 Days Safer Cities Challenge. The 40 Days Safer Cities Challenge is an annual international campaign that starts on the 21st of September, which is International Day of Peace, and runs until the 31st of October, which is World Cities Day. Promoted by the Global Network on Safer Cities, the challenge raises awareness on safety in cities and urban crime prevention. It promotes concrete actions by citizens and encourages innovations for achieving the urban and safety dimensions of the Sustainable Development Goals. The challenges that this initiative intends to address include issues of safety and crime by promoting active citizenship and innovation to achieve the urban and safety dimensions of the Sustainable Development Goals. This slide just gives a roadmap of the 40 Days Safer City Challenge, starting from the 21st of September, going over the World Habitat Day, through World Mental Health Day and International Day of the Girl, and ends on World Cities Day on the 31st of October. The slide just shows you that same information in a different format. The key messages that this campaign promotes are the need for collective action, committed leadership at local government level, change agency in individuals, and context-specific strategies and solutions. The importance of the campaign is based on the alarming statistics around gender-based violence, kidnapping, and high rates of murder and violent crimes, particularly also due to the fact that compared to most countries, South Africa has some of the highest prevailing statistics. The issues that this campaign tackles are not new and are frequently raised on different platforms, including social media. This slide illustrates just a few posts focused on these issues that came off social media. We encourage you to post on your social media page about any key points and highlights that you take from this conversation using the hashtags #SafeCities, gender-based violence, Take Action for Cities, Urban October, and Save Our Children. And you are welcome to tag in UN Habitat, Plan Global, National Cochta, Sibikwa Arts, SA Cities Network, and IUDF_ZA. The panelists that are part of this discussion are from the collaborating organizations who have come together to partner on this project promoting safety innovation. The project title is YIMA, which is a homonym, as Ariel mentioned in the introduction. And the reason that this title was chosen is because of the duality of situations and realities, and the fact that girls and young women are in a similar position, on the one hand, needing to advocate for their rights, and on the other, needing to call on society to support them in creating change. While we understand that there are multiple and diverse groups of people who do not feel safe in areas where they live, work, and play, such as people with disabilities or asylum seekers, our decision to focus on the perspectives of women is based on the pertinence of challenging issues that make cities unlivable at the moment. Interviews were conducted with girls and young women between the ages of 6 and 27 residing in Gauteng. These were packaged into a video that will be screened a little later during this event. The video and panel discussion will focus on safety, crime, and actions that can be taken to build cities in which every person can enjoy the right to fully and freely live, regardless of their gender, age, and socio-economic standing. We encourage you to follow the activities of the UN Habitat's 40 Days Safer Cities Challenge on their website, and I hope that this discussion is fruitful and engaging in finding suitable solutions for current challenges in cities. Back to you, Ariel.
Thank you very much, Karen. So allow me to introduce the panelists. First, I would like to introduce Stephanie Mills-Chetty, who is the Director for Urban Policy Development and Management at the National Department of Cooperative Governance, and she's been in that position since March 2018. She manages and supports provincial COCTAs and municipalities to implement the Integrated Urban Development Framework. Next, I would like to introduce Phyllis Klotz, who is the Artistic Director and founder of Sibikwa Arts Centre, and she has had 40 years of experience managing and directing and creating programs for particularly young people and young African women. I would also like to introduce Karen Green, who is the business manager of Sibikwa Arts Centre, and she holds a master's degree in arts and culture management from Wits University. She is also an arts and culture manager, advocate, and trainer, and is passionate about exploring alternative business models for the sustainability of arts organizations. I'd also like to introduce Sipilele Ngobese, who is a researcher in the Inclusive Cities program of the South African Cities Network. She coordinates the Urban Safety Reference Group. So next up, I would like us to watch this video together that was compiled by the Sibikwa Arts Centre, and thereafter we're going to have a discussion. Thank you.
Yo, when you guys things we share like the bank, scaling from this guy. You are couldn't walk alone. And I was like anticipating that if you share like I am, then kitchen because I'm quite safe like yeah, and the best of we don't have one more to start and we don't go. I'm quite safe like. My name is Neoma Shangun. I'm a student at the Sibikwa Arts Centre.
My name is Sanelisiwe Mkhalipi.
My name is Nopumelelo Mahlangu. I'm 27 years of age.
Sanmunani, ikamala mufihliwe, sibongo samo Madisa.
Kamala Miklingile Mkankama.
Hi guys, my name is Mbali Mkwena.
Hello, my name is Sato Gadimeng.
Hi guys, my name is Lisette and I'm in Sibikwa.
My name is Nosipon Labo.
Hi everyone, my name is Ngubile Mamaso.
Hi guys, I'm Virati Dalman.
Hi everyone, my name is Letutando Baba.
I'm Libu Lamini, I'm 12 years old at Sibikwa Arts Centre.
No, I don't feel safe because South Africa is dangerous.
If it's a quiet area, I really do not feel safe. But if it's like a park or something, then it's easier for me to just feel safe, yeah.
I don't feel safe at all in my environment, simply because of the elements that are happening around my location, which is we've got rape, women and children are getting raped, even men, and we've got hijacking, people are hijacking cars daily. And we see that there's human trafficking happening. Children and women, again, they are getting adopted by people that are very unknown even today.
So for me, Ngoba manje ngikhompete ngipila ayikho safe because I know ukuthi maybe uma sewugibela iteksi uzothola ukuthi oh hayi iteksi e-right no kanti angeke ibe yiyo. So mase ngifika la ngifike ngivele ngithi thank God sengifikile sengikhona la ngikhona.
Usually I wear ama-trouser, ama-tracksuit because of like kwesinye isikhathi like uma uhamba esitradini uthola abafana abakubhekile suyaqabanga ukuthi because abanye bakubheka ngamanye amehlo vele ukuthi yamolo uma ngamthola nje. So yeah, like ngi-self-conscious ngento engizigcokayo a lot.
I feel the safest when I'm at home because outside kids are getting kidnapped and there's human trafficking. Kids are taken out to other countries and world to be taken as sex slaves and slaves that work for white people.
I'm scared of strangers. I'm scared that they are going to kill me.
My mom said I mustn't talk to strangers. They will kidnap you and kill you.
It depends on what I think of the person. If it's an older person, what I've been taught as growing up, and you just move on.
Nope, I don't feel safe because they might do like anything they want, especially with the gender-based violence thing that is trending like right now.
I'm a guy friends. I wouldn't say it's in our temper to a point where like I can feel like completely safe and comfortable around him.
It's not really easy to trust, like to have boyfriends and stuff, because like it's like the new reason not to date these days is because you might actually get killed.
Not really, because sometimes they're sketchy teachers that you don't know what they want to do with you.
I feel safer around my female teachers than my male teachers. I am not really sure why, but I don't know. I feel like female teachers are just less scary or less to be afraid of than male teachers, especially like what's been going on these days with the whole like gender-based violence thing. I just really feel safer around female teachers.
I usually play in my complex, but not outside of the gate.
When like there are adults that like are safe to be with.
I actually don't feel safe because some of them you might think you're safe around, but then yet they're planning something sketchy to do, even though they're elders. I just don't trust anyone.
I think we can protect each other if we like work in groups and not individually, because when we work like together, it won't be that easy to get a hold of like all of us.
I guess ukuthi kufuneke ngishinge like ukuthi ngingabi approachable kalula yabo. What will make me feel safer is for us to have our fathers and our brothers around my community taking care of us.
And I feel like if everyone is just educated on the impact of gender-based violence, educated on why it is wrong to violate any person's rights just because they're vulnerable, you know, and education is power, and if I know that everyone in my environment thinks the same way about this, I will feel safe.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you to the Sibikwa Arts Centre for compiling this video and interviewing all the girls and young women whose voices that we heard. So welcome to our audience again. My name is Ariel. I'm going to be facilitating this afternoon's discussion. And to our audience, you're most welcome to pose your questions to our panelists in the chat box. And I'd like to perhaps just start us off on some of the reflections that you may have just from watching this video. Did it elicit any thoughts, any feelings? What did you hear, and what are some of the initial thoughts that you have? Maybe I'd like to start off by asking Karen, some of the girls they interviewed before some of their initial responses before the camera went live. How did they find putting this video together? Karen, would you like to respond first?
Sure, thank you, Ariel. They were nervous. They were nervous to share their opinion. They were nervous to talk about things that made them feel sensitive and vulnerable. And they wanted to present themselves in a very particular way. So quite a few of them were like, oh, please, can I actually re-record that? And I wondered if it was about that they knew that people would be seeing it, or are they worried about the types of people that are seeing it and what they would be perceived as, depending on their answers to some of the questions that we asked? Because some of them, I mean, talking about teachers and talking about elder family members is sensitive. So, you know, there could be multiple things that create that kind of anxiety for them in having their opinions recorded.
Thank you. And maybe just to follow up on that, how, and obviously it is a very sensitive subject, and what I picked up on was this inherent fear. So do you think that that was addressed through this process of being able to voice it and being sort of this knowledge that what they're sharing is going to be public?
I feel, I mean, when I listen to what they're saying and the way that they say it, I wonder where that information is coming from, and how are they internalizing it, and how are they interpreting it in their daily lives. Are some of the things they are saying just catch terms that we are using on social media around GBV? How deep does the understanding actually go? And how deep should their understanding go as young as they are? What kind of trauma, what kind of perspective does that give them as young girls, holding such complex, complicated, traumatic information? Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Maybe I'd like to move on to Stephanie, your response in creating these safe spaces. So one of the young girls spoke about using taxi as a way of commuting. As a long-term goal, how can different stakeholders go about creating safer and desensitized transport spaces, for example, such as taxi ranks and bus stops and train stations? Is there maybe a plan to integrate perhaps more females into the industry as drivers and as security? Because, you know, nowadays young people are on the move. So how do we ensure or how do we contribute to these safe access?
Thanks, Ariel, for that question. Just wanted to say, from the reflection in terms of the video and how the girls actually feel using public transport, it's very distinct uncertainty. Perhaps maybe the community and where they're actually coming from doesn't actually give them that environment to make them feel safe. But in terms of public transport, particularly in the use of taxis, you know, one has to make sure when young women, children are actually using public transport to ensure that the environment is nicely lit up, that it has cameras, you know, to alert the police if there's any high risk areas, any areas of crime, and also to make them feel safe by ensuring to them that, you know, there's a place for them to sit down and wait rather than a deserted place, to put in public transport spaces where it's designated pavements and not near where there's too tall grass. You know, they alluded to the fact that they would not want to get out of a taxi or a public vehicle, you know, if there's long grass, because they are scared of what could happen to them. And I think these teenagers and young women out there today are very aware of gender-based violence. They are very aware of the fact that, you know, the world is unsafe. But I think if we as government come in together and promote more safety elements within our public transport systems and embed that into our existing policies, it'll create then an environment that's conducive and safe for them. Thanks, Ariel.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'd like to bring in Sipelele, please. So Nomatlangu said that if her environment felt the same about safety as she does, then she would feel safe. So public parks, for example, are a vital component of cities' spatial structures and play an important role in the social life and fabric of cities as spaces of rest, play, mobility, exercise, and social connection, particularly in high density city centers. So from a security governance perspective, how best can the civic actively participate and directly influence policies and processes that Stephanie had just alluded to inform the architecture of these spaces? So for designing, so adopting for the people, by the people strategy, these spaces must also educate the ordinary people who will be responsible for sustaining these safer spaces. So maybe you could speak to us a bit about how to create safe recreational spaces.
You've said it all, Ariel. I think, yeah, my job here is done. Thanks for that very important question around issues of public space and what they play, the role they play in whether people are and feel safe. So I think just to reflect on what that video invoked for me, first, I think as I was watching the young women speak about what they're experiencing, I was taken back to my own experiences of being that age and how it felt. So I'll tell you like a little story. So the one time I needed to go get a haircut, right? So I went to like a busy train station next to where I stay. There's a lot of like little kiosks and informal traders and an old man who used to give haircuts. And I think just before I reached the place, like just my fight or flight response kicked in and I just did not feel comfortable. So I was like, oh my God, I can't do this. It's like this place is filled with a bunch of men. I'm just going to pretend I'm a boy to get this haircut so I can get out of there safely. So the calculations that you make, even as a little girl, around your safety. So I walked out of there looking like a boy, and that was me for the next 2 weeks. But that's what I had to do to that's what I felt I had to do to kind of make myself feel space. And I think for a very long time, that's what I did. That's how I coped with being in public space as a young girl, to the extent that I only felt comfortable wearing dresses and looking like a woman in my older years when I felt I had more control around my own safety. So that's how what it is to be like a young girl in public space feels. And those are the kinds of decisions and responses that we have to make. And they're not so good for our well-being and our health, education. So a lot of what we can't participate in as a result of the calculations we have to make around our spaces. And it still says that just safety dictating what you wear and how you express yourself, it just shows that women are not enjoying the right to the city, and women are not getting the full share of public space. And I think there's a lot to be done around that, the interventions that need to happen around space and making space safer for young women, girls, people of all vulnerabilities, including people with disabilities. And there's a lot to be done about attitudes within space. So issues of catcalling, how women are regarded in public. And so I can only imagine that when you're a young girl walking in the street and you see boys, you're like, oh my God, like I'm going to be catcalled and all this kind of stuff. So it's about spatial interventions, Ariel. Integrated planning and more intentional planning around making spaces safe and welcoming for women, how we design public parks, and really I would call for more and more consciousness and action around co-creative practice around that. So bringing girls along in the process of planning and implementing public spaces. But I would also say it's a social intervention that requires us to engage with social attitudes towards young women and girls, and and women in general, how society views women, issues of objectification, and just not seeing women as human beings. And I think that's the crux of it, that like we are in societies, we have grown up and become women in societies that see us as objects, and that even if you make spatial interventions without addressing more the social attitudes and that lead to violence against women, you need like a twin approach, I would say, in response to that particular question. Thank you.
Thank you, Siphelele. And maybe just expanding on what you've shared, the social intervention and the social attitudes. And for me, what struck is you're speaking of this coping mechanism in public spaces and this pretense to be a boy. And what struck me is that we can't freely be ourselves in our respected, dignified way of being as women. And I'd like to bring in Phyllis. We know that education plays a really, really important role in how society comes to be, how our young people come to be. And, you know, Phyllis, to you, how can the education system better react to gender-based violence? Are teachers being trained on how to use gender-responsive pedagogies in the classroom? What measures are being taken to establish a safe and violence-free environment by improving the school and educational structures? Are teachers being sensitized on a personal level? And in what ways can schools and educational programs engage the parents and communities at large to help children and young people digest and interpret the messages from different minds as well as the media? Phyllis, over to you.
I think, you know, generally the education system is failing us dismally. And I think it continues into this area. I don't think teachers are being trained to handle the question of abuse or young girls being abused. I mean, we only need to see how many teachers, male teachers, blackmail young girls into having relationships with them so that their marks can be reasonable or not reasonable, or they'll buy them a chicken licken. And this I've seen. I've seen that girls give themselves up for chicken licken. So we're not coping very well. Of course, myself, as a creative arts strategist, educationalist, I would say that we need much more creative arts in the school to deal with these issues in life orientation and in creative arts. The problem is, of course, that these are seen as soft subjects and people are not really engaged with them. So we're all moving headway into science and technology, but that's only one part of a person. What about the rest of the person? How about educating the whole person simultaneously so that all synergies go forward? And we need a lot of education. When I did a show about 4 years ago on the right to sexual orientation adapted to Chapter 2, Section 9 of the Constitution, we had a lot of young men in the audience who were quite like amazed at the Q&A sessions afterwards. Like, we never thought about this. We never knew about this, that this was the situation of women who were not, what can I say, were lesbian, you know. The young men would say, but we never thought about this. You know, we just sort of looked down on it. We never took them into consideration as people. We just were oblivious of their needs. So our system is failing us, really failing us, and we need to make representation about this. Young girls, they start off very well in school. You know, girls have got a lot to say for themselves, but as they grow and the system overtakes them, they become less and less vocal. You will find, of course, one or two bright sparks who've got a lot to say, who will lead their classes, but most of the girls will not. And most of the women will look to men to lead them or to voice their opinion. So I'm not talking about people, well, anyway, when I say I'm not talking about people in the higher socio-economic bracket, that's absolute rubbish, because you will find many women married to men who will say, no, I don't know. I don't know what to vote. I must ask my husband. I've seen this, and it's a reality. So there's a lot of work to do in the educational system, in social systems, and even, not even, but primarily in the economic situation. Does that answer your question?
Karen, I'm going to bring you in, just expanding on what Phyllis shared about system. And we know that as much as many of these programs would like to do more of this work to really address the issues on the ground, but this is limited to business models, to funding models. Can you speak to us about some of the sustainability issues when trying to address realities on the ground, how to ensure that systems can be in place to address what has been shared?
Thanks, Ariel. Well, I think it's really about starting small. I think when you look at these issues as a broad national and even global challenge, it feels very overwhelming. I do believe that, and at Sibikwa, we believe that everybody has agency. And if they are directed, and if they are channeled, and if they are supported within an enabling ecosystem, that change can come from the people and not necessarily from the policy down. Of course, the policy needs to support and needs to represent and needs to reflect the reality, but it cannot take the power away from the individual to make the change.
Super, thank you very much. I'd like to bring in Emma, whose poem we heard right at the beginning of our afternoon. Emma, would you like to come in with your responses on what you've seen in the video, and how you came, also if you could share with us your inspiration for writing the poem?
Emma, you're welcome to unmute and start your video. I've seen she's just put a message in the chat that she can't at the moment. So she's saying there's a bit too much noise in her background.
All good.
Okay.
Thank you. We will share the video link in the chat. I'd like to move on to another aspect that came up during the video, and moving from education to culture. And I think what's very prevalent in South African communities, Nomatlangu had said that she's been taught to greet her elders and ask how they are. And this highlights how, as people from one generation to the next, we are largely influenced by culture. Culture shapes our values and principles and guides how we interact with one another, and this informs our sense of community. In urban areas, there is a melting pot of cultures and a sense of community being more geographic rather than value-based, like in rural areas. How can traditional leaders and traditional affairs institutions collectively engage and contribute to the broader conversation about the creation of safer cities, particularly addressing the role of culture in combating gender-based violence? So I'd like to ask maybe Karen or Phyllis to jump in on that, and maybe just your experience from the Sibikwa Arts Centre, please.
Well, obviously culture, the way we brought up, speaking of culture in its broadest possible sense, influences us, influences our thinking, the way we behave, the way we eat, the way we respond, the way we dress, even, to everything. Okay, but I found here at Sibikwa with the young people, as Gauteng is a melting pot, it was really interesting to promote all, as much as possible, all the cultures. So isiZulu, isiTswana, we try and do all the dances so that people understand it, the songs. And I think we need a lot of that in South Africa. Myself, as a white person who's worked for the past 40 years in a Black environment, it's been the most rewarding, one of the most rewarding experiences of my life, because it has opened me up as a person, my ideas, my thoughts, my feelings, the way I view things so differently, and has given me complete 180-degree circle of how I view life. So I think it's important in South Africa that we all try and make cultural leaps. If we are going to live together peacefully, if we're going to work together, we, all of us, need to make some kind of cultural leap into each other's cultures, and then we perhaps will get to know and understand each other.
Thank you, Phyllis. Karen, do you have a response on that?
Karen, Karen doesn't. She's busy kind of managing the situation, jumping around a bit like a grasshopper here.
All good. I'm going to, thank you, Phyllis. I'm going to pivot to Juma from the UN Habitat, who is the coordinator of the Safer Cities program. Juma, it would be great to hear your perspective on the 40 days challenge that is being showcased. And if you can maybe chat to us a bit about the background of how this program came to be, and just this particular idea that we've shared about how to create safer spaces for our girls and our young women. Juma, would you like to come in?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You're most welcome.
First and foremost, come for the 40-day Safer Cities Challenge. It's refreshing to hear the outlook of arts as it relates to a discourse around social change and a discourse that also eventually promotes safety in a city. The 40 days is principally got first in an urban spectrum as part of the broader Urban October celebrations or events to celebrate innovations which we seldom look at in the face of the challenges that we face in cities and human settlements. With the coming of the Habitat 3 in 2016 in Quito, there was a certain shift in the way we looked away from it as a bad outcome of development to one as a source of development. It meant that we begin to look at cities as one of the greatest human inventions that we have, and that we need to understand the creative, insightful ways of people. As we look at safety in this lens, we begin to see the coping and adaptation abilities of citizens, of inhabitants, even in places that we define as hotspot areas. You find not all the citizens in hotspot areas are engaged in crime and violence. So what essentially is the resilience of those that don't? What is it that makes them not to commit crime or violence? And that's essentially where the narrative is now more focused on. And it's here that you begin to build on the social capital of citizens. And you begin to look at forms of expression as arts and culture, and see how this manifests and play out in terms of how inhabitants identify with own their human settlement. When you begin to get to this, understand that the urban identity has been very much criminalized in its differentiatedness. And so a lot of subcultures that have grown with urban, that have really built on the differentiation of the city with the ways, particularly the young people identify beyond their ethnic, racial, cultural, age or gender divides, then you find that in a lot of those subcultures, the legislative realities of our cities and towns do not correspond with that. And we can take one dimension, for example, in the city of Rio, you find that it's the Afro Reggae group that has been able to transform the way the relationship to the police has played out over time in a favela that was understood to be very high crime and that had exhibited high gang violence levels. But it was just due to the change of relationships between the police and the youth through the young people training the police using graffiti and hip hop that made the communities accept the police as one of their own. Previous to that, it was a question about we need to change the youth. That shifted from changing the youth to changing the relationship with youth, because then the identity and the subculture that youth came with the cohesion that they brought to public spaces, was essentially recognized now as an asset in the fight against crime and violence. And so it is when you begin to look at spaces like what you speak to, that public space is indeed the center of what we would define as safety as a public good. Public space will enable us to move away from spatial segregation of the city, where we begin to like clothes, or in the favelas or in the townships where we see sort of formations like vigilante groups that take on their own security. So instead of safety and security becoming a privatized good, it begins to have multiple positive expressions in public space where it becomes a shared commodity. And arts and culture indeed is really one of the key drivers that we can actually latch on to drive citizens at the center of not only creating more available public spaces, but also in terms of the use and access of those spaces. How we leverage on community appropriation in a real way, in the sense where communities themselves identify with space, then planning, legislation follow to sort of then formalize those spaces.
Thank you, Juma.
Arts and culture, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your very thorough and detailed response. And I want to maybe pick up on your shared commodity, community appropriation, and social cohesion. And I think for me, one of the key phrases that you shared was really a change in relationships. And I'm sure, you know, everybody has been deeply, deeply affected by COVID. And I think, you know, two of maybe the most contributing elements, one is technology, and, you know, with the, I think, long-term impact of COVID as well. I'd like to maybe bring in Monica, who has been leading on the SDG in South Africa, what her views are from the video and the contribution in South Africa in response to COVID and how we go forward as government. Monica, would you like to speak briefly with us, please?
Thank you very much, and my humble apologies for joining late. I was very moved by the video when I watched it, and I found it to be very saddening, and that young women and girls grow up with that amount of fear. So I was a little bit at sea for a while, but caught myself with the thought that I have to play my part. We have to play our part to make our future a better one and a safer one for these wonderful people that gave so freely of their opinions and their heart and their soul in the video. And there are many more like them throughout the country. And so I'm a firm believer in the idea of the ability to plan for safety and to integrate safety in as a key component of how we conceptualize a space and how we develop it, so that those young women don't only feel safe inside of their homes, but also as part of the broader community. And I think that beyond these words, the sort of action around the upgrading of informal settlements, for example, through the introduction of street lighting and improved sanitation, so that women can walk without having to sort of jump over rivers of sewage, or don't have to go into an unsafe place in order to use the toilet, etc. Those are real life improvements that we can effect as government, and really improve on safety in that way. And then I just also wanted to touch lastly on this idea of the intersectionality of safety, implying that there are a lot of silos to break, a lot of philosophical conversations to have between various stakeholders around who does what part and how do we actually work together. And that is, I think, going to be probably the most difficult part, because if I know what I need to do and you know what you need to do, how do we figure out what parts we have to do together to actually make this work and not make, like, entrench a problem even more. Thanks.
Thank you, Monica, for sharing. We'd like to open the floor for questions. So if you have questions, please post them in the chat box. And maybe I'd like to bring in Siphelele quickly, just if you any thoughts and responses on what Monica shared.
So I think from my side, sorry, I'm just trying to start my video. There we go. I think just in response to what Monica has said, and it's something I've shared in other platforms as well, I think the agenda to localize SDGs, the new urban agenda being driven from the national side, I think I must appreciate the efforts to kind of articulate what it means for South Africa specifically, to begin to distill and create understanding about what agendas coming from the global level mean when localized. And I think that's been a very important aspect of the work, of then putting those principles and philosophies into action at the local level. So really, I would stress this point around continued partnership between national, particularly the Department of Human Settlements, together with COGTA, partnership with the local level, which they have been wonderful at forging those connections and partnerships. And I think just to reiterate the need to take those forward and to begin to see their manifestations in space, and to see their manifestations in the social relationships that take root in our communities. And so I'm very much interested in translating those very good and wonderful principles into see them come alive in terms of changing the plight of women, young girls, and all vulnerable people in cities. And to see, I think something I spoke to earlier about women actually reaping the urban dividend and actually benefiting from living in cities. And I think we all understand that cities represent the opportunity to change one's own life, to improve one's own lot in life, and women and children and girls are just not able to access that at an equitable and fair share. And I would really want us to drive this point, and maybe just like to create a groundswell of partnered action around realizing the right to the city for women and girls. And that's what I would say in response to Monica's input. Thank you.
Thank you, Siphelele. I see a comment from Flo Hello. I apologize for the wrong pronunciation. Would you like to unmute your mic and share your comment?
Thanks. Yeah, I was hoping videos of sorry everyone, but it was just, you know, I'd seen the video and I was
Hello.
how it's just women.
I'm sorry, Solo, I'm sorry to jump in here, but your voice is making a monster voice. We're not hearing you well. Ariel, perhaps you want to read her comments and then when we can try again?
Sure. So Tola Hello said, I'm struck by how it's mostly always women attending these discussions, and it's not to say that there aren't any men invested in understanding and ensuring safety. Men are as the general perpetrators of crime and the reason for insecurity issues, and this is rooted in patriarchy and other ideologies, but they're often absent from these engagements. Felicia's comments on the importance of education are spot on. ECD and the broader education system are critical in socializing people and influencing how we behave and treat each other in spaces. Subjects like life orientation should be better developed so that they actually teach young people life skills. Hello, would you like to unmute and try again?
I think she's trying to reconnect. I don't see her.
Okay. On the subject of connectivity and reconnecting, maybe just touching on briefly on the role of technology and creating enabling virtual environments, I'd like to address this question for Stephanie. Does South Africa have the capacity to start moving towards the safer city initiative? We spoke about all of the different systems and building models and creating, quality of services provided by government and partnerships with businesses. So would you like to come in on how we can expand using technology to enable this to happen? Thank you.
Thanks, Ariel. So the pleasure is all mine. You know, from listening into some of the speakers that came in and just sharing on their personal insights, it just got me thinking how different society is when it comes to safety. And, initially now we're trying to introduce the element of crime prevention through environmental design. And, as government, particularly my department, the Department of Cooperative Governance, is looking at establishing a smarter cities framework. And listening into the video, from a heartwarming thought of what's going on in the mind of these young women, in particularly, is around the concern of their well-being and their future, and to be safe, to enjoy an environment that is conducive for them to be free when walking through parks or going to schools, etc. So for me, in the concept of introducing a safer city component into the smarter city element would not be just embedded around technology. It would be advancing maybe knowledge sharing and initiatives around urban safety and promoting, ways of women to feel safer in an environment by design your street lighting, etc. But I think it goes back to the particular element of design, and it's connected to how all different systems of government actually come together. You know, like, for example, how does the Department of Transport plan together with the Department of Housing? How do we utilize spaces within the inner cities so that we can live, work, and play at the same time? And I think even with the linkages around urban and rural, you know, when we talk smart cities, there is no smart cities that exist without a rural dividend. So is that it's about building those linkages, creating and co-creating those platforms. But most importantly, Juma Asiago was on the platform earlier from the UN Safer Cities program, alluded to the importance of arts and culture. And I think if we don't design our smart cities with that particular element of introducing arts and culture, we would lose the momentum of what a smart city should be. Because it's not just about having high-tech and innovative designs, but it's about including an aspect of social inclusionary, of accessibility and feeling safer. And I think also enabling an environment so that there's no classification according to race or ethnicity, and also no classification to, you know, you live in a rural area and I live in the urban area, but a space that everybody can feel safe, that can come in and share in ideas. And I think also when we look at smarter city initiatives, you know, we always speak about when you develop a town or a city or a region, particularly focusing and zooming in into a smaller town as well. When you look at developing a town, there's always an arts and a culture and a heritage place, you know, embedded with all the other land uses that one would need, like a post office and that kind of thing. And it takes me back to the video that we are not far out from what people actually want. People just want to be safe. They just want to express themselves in a way, you know, where they feel that they can enjoy this life that they have in front of them. So thanks. Thank you so much, Ariel.
Thank you, Stephanie. Any closing thoughts from Karen and Phyllis?
No.
Nothing more.
Nothing more. I think everyone said everything.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Phyllis, for your contribution. Sipilele, any final parting thoughts?
Not much from me, Ariel, just to say that, yeah, it's been an honor to be part of this discussion. And it's something that I really want to see us sustain and also take forward, this discussion around what it all means when a gender lens is put on a lot of issues that affect us, particularly the city safety discussion. So I think with all the panel members seated here, I think we make a good contingent to start and then also continue a conversation. I'm looking forward to a lot of continued engagement around this and hope that this is only the beginning and not the end of a process to bring expression to the rights of women in our country and in our cities in particular. And yeah, thank you for the opportunity and steering us so well, Ariel.
Thank you, Sipilele, and I'm going to hand over to Stephanie for closing remarks.
Thank you, Ariel. So I'm also trying to avoid the sun in my office at the same time. But I just want to say a big thank you goes out to, you know, all of our partners that pull together this effort to try and contribute to the UN Habitat 40-day Safer City Challenge. You know, leading up to World Cities Day, I think the UN has put together a really fantastic program. And we by far had the privilege of coming in together as different partners to showcase some of our own personal experiences in our societies today. So it wasn't just about what policies and programs do you have and how do you compete with one another. But I think it was a coming together, and this platform presented an all of society approach, because we have an initiative where we've given everybody the opportunity to just be themselves and express what it means for them, particularly around urban safety. So just want to say thank you, everybody, for all of your contributions, and particularly, you know, being able to contribute towards the 40-day Safer City Challenge and using the Urban Fest as a platform to promote it. I think it was really good. And from my end, I also, you know, hope to see that we can make a difference in our society, in our communities. And I think the role of civil society and, private sector, academia, NGOs, and government are very important. And like Sipilele said, and even Monica had alluded to that, it's very important that we co-create and we formalize these partnerships and plan together for one another. I think this is the South Africa that we want. This is the South Africa that we want to see. And globally, we are very competitive. So we would like to also learn from the UN and other countries. We had the privilege of also being part of the expert group meeting this week in Madrid with the Madrid team and the UN Habitat. And it was so great to hear in and listening to developing spatial indicators and monitoring tools for urban safety. So I think many of the conversations that came out from the video here today is going to make us have a series of conversations going forward. And I look forward to engaging further. Thank you so much, Ariel, and everyone. Over to you, Ariel.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I also echo Stephanie's thanks to Sipilele, to Monica, to Juma, as well as to Phyllis and to Karen. Before we say goodbye, can I ask everybody, please, to switch on their camera so we can take a collective commemorative photo from our conversation today.
Oh my God, we don't look great on this side.
That's okay. That's okay. Let's all switch on our cameras. And maybe Karen can take the group picture from her computer side. Yes, are we all ready with our best smiles?
Sorry, guys.
Karen, will you count us down when you're ready?
Maybe Karen is on mute. She must unmute.
Yes, she is on mute.
Sorry, I was saying I don't actually know how to take a picture. I was just going to screen grab it afterwards from a different program.
That's perfect.
Yeah, if Tulu can, if you could do that, Tulu, because I know you know how to do it. And then Karen, you can also take just a screen grab.
Okay. We all got our best smiles on?
Yes. Are we done?
Are we good?
Yep.
Are we?
Okay.
Super. Thank you, everybody. I'd like to thank you. I'd like to leave you with a provocation. My spiritual mentor, Daisaku Ikeda, has proclaimed the 21st century to be the century of Africa and the century of women, based on the premise that those who have suffered the most deserve to become the happiest. So I sincerely hope that through our continued engagement, through Safer Cities, through our own networks of care and influence, that we can really make the safety and prosperity not only of women and not only of all those who are vulnerable to be better and brighter. So I thank you for your presence and your contributions from today, and I really look forward to our continued engagement. Please take good care and have a wonderful rest of the week. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Ariel. Thanks, everyone.